Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's 7 for 7 YouTube live event. My name's Kevin Spry. I work with the professional learning group at Texas Instruments, part of the T³ Teachers Teaching with Technology, and their Ed Tech division. The 7 for 7 is a session that we host at our annual T³ International Conference. This is an opportunity for 7 educators to talk about something that they are passionate about in education, and hence is the idea of 7 for 7. They get to speak for 7 minutes each. And one of our speakers of the past events is Amin Lalani, and we're pleased to have him here with us tonight. Hi, Amin. Good to see you.
Hello, Kevin. How are you?
Good, thank you. All right. Amin is just a little bit of background. He began his career in Palestine, Texas public schools, and then he moved to Austin and taught with Taylor ISD. And after that, he went to Region 10 Education Service Center in Dallas, Texas, as a secondary math consultant. He's currently a master teacher at the University of Texas in Dallas in the UTeach program and has been a T³ instructor since 2014. Now, Amin had a presentation entitled Risk Taking at the T³ International Conference, and we're going to do a replay of that, and then we'll open it up for your questions and have a good discussion with Amin about his presentation.
Taking the risk is to improve ourselves as educators, and ultimately, we take risks to really improve what happens in our classroom, our campus, our district. So before I go any further, I want to start with a definition. As a math person, definitions are really important. So the definition I have is actually referenced in business and educational research. Now, the first part where it says loss does not really make sense or apply to education. However, failure does apply, the prospect of failure. So Dr. Ramirez mentioned that in science, we have failure, but we call that data. In education, we need to have the same mindset, that when we take risk, we should call that data and make failure our friend. So what I want to do is talk about 3 different types of risk. Now, I'm not saying this is an exhaustive list. These are the 3 that came to mind. So the first one I want to talk about is presenting in front of your peers, presenting lessons, ideas, topics in your class that have been successful for you, and you share that with your peers. And I know some of you today took that risk for the very first time, and I hope it went well for you. And if not, then tomorrow, day after, good luck to you on that. And we can also be integrating technology in our classroom. As a math person, I love to bring coding into my classroom. So for some of you, bringing 10 minutes of coding into your classroom might be a risk because, again, it's not familiar to you or your students. But you are willing to bring it in because you know abstract ideas such as functions, constants, variables, all those ideas can be conceptualized using coding into your classroom. Also, since we're at a conference, I want to talk about some of the risks that we don't take as participants. When we are in a session, when we're sitting down, when we have those questions, as educators, we feel like, you know what, I know the answers. Or I should know the answers, so I'm not going to ask some of these questions because I'm not comfortable. I'm not willing to take that risk. And also, if you're a biology teacher, when we look for sessions, we are looking at biology types. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but maybe one session in a day, if you're a biology person, maybe going to an Algebra 1. If you're an Algebra 1 teacher, maybe going to a Cal, Pre-Cal, see how what they're doing impacts or bring things from that session into yours. So let me see if I can propose 2 different unique types of risk, and I want to see how you would handle that. And be very honest with yourself about this. So the first one is, you were just observed by your principal, and you were demoing a lesson with great pedagogy and technology, and at the end of the lesson, your principal comes up to you and says, hey, that was a fantastic lesson. I want you to do that with 40 teachers on our campus. Would you take that risk? Now, the next one, it's going to happen. Or it probably already happened, and I don't know what your answer, but Kevin will come up to you at 10 p.m. when I'm in the elevator, and he says, hey, Amin, I want you to be one of the 7 for 7 presenter. Now, here's the thing. I'm standing here so you know what the answer is, right? But I'll tell you, when Kevin asked me internally, I had a different answer internally, right? Because here's the thing. For me, a risk always starts internally because there's that first internal battle. For me, I always start off, for some odd reason, again, this is just personally to me, I start off with the I cannot. I feel like I don't belong in that space, right? I doubt myself, especially in unique types of risk. This is unique. I've never done this before. So when Kevin asked me, I was like, why should I be? I don't belong in that space. And for me, I struggle with that multiple times in my career. The first time I got a job at Taylor ISD, being an instructional specialist, again, I doubted myself. When I became a math consultant at Region 10, I doubted myself. And the last time is when I was asked to work with UTD computer science PhD professors to write a curriculum to help integrate math and science into math and science classrooms. So integrate computer science into math and science classrooms. I was working with PhD individuals, and for me, that really caused me to doubt myself. So here's what I learned. If you know you want to take a risk, you have to know who you are. So what I need to do every time I get scared is to stay positive. I look at what I bring to the table. Curriculum writing. I've got pedagogy. I've got experience teaching in the classroom, so I've got to stay positive. Once you have the risk in mind and you have evaluated yourself, the next thing you want to do is surround yourself with individuals that have taken the similar risk. So here's the thing. Research says that if you find individuals that have taken that risk and you surround yourself with those individuals, you are more likely to take that risk. So relationships, Monique, you talked about that. It's really important, right? Surround yourself, build those relationships so when you need support, when you want some guidance, you can actually get that. So now you've identified a risk, self-evaluated yourself, surrounded yourself with individuals that can help you. The next thing you need to do is chunk whatever you want to do into smaller pieces. The research says we're not really good at multitasking. Right? We struggle with that. So what you need to do is take whatever you want to do, break it into smaller chunks. So if your ultimate goal is to actually do something like this for 7 for 7, I hope this is not the first thing you do. Maybe you ask your principal, I would love to share this strategy with the teachers on my department. So do it in front of 6 or 10 individuals. Local conference, and then from there, move on up. Also, if you are trying to bring technology back into your classroom, the last thing you want to do is teach them new technology and also mathematics at the same time. Again, that multitasking, that's a very hard thing for your students, and the same thing for you. It's quite difficult. So the last thing I want to talk about is we tend to take 3 unique types of risk, and I think we're better at the teacher part of it. So as teachers, we can be taking a risk to bring new approaches into our classroom, maybe something like project-based instruction, inquiry-based, maybe technology, 10-minute of coding, we can do that. The next type of risk you can take is something as a leader. So you brought 10-minute of coding into your classroom, why not make it equitable and bring it on your campus? So now you're taking a risk as a leader. And the last type of risk you can take is as a learner. For me, the last time I took this risk was to learn coding and to get my CS certification. So we can also take a risk as a learner. So here's what I want to ask you. I would love to hear from you about the types of risks that you've taken or the types of risks you are willing to take. And I would love to hear that. So if you can, use the hashtag T3IC or T3Learns to share some of that educational risk-taking with the rest of us. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Wow. Thank you. Well, thanks for letting us a chance to see that again. Very stirring. I really enjoyed listening the first time and then again getting a chance to see that again. For people that are joining us, if you have questions, there'll be an opportunity. You can enter it in the chat window, and we'll attempt to address them as we go through in the next 20 minutes or so that we have with Amin. So I want to start with Amin with a question that, and I think is probably a very apropos for the topic that you've got. What's the what is the biggest risk that you have ever taken professionally beyond just speaking for the 7 for 7? Since you already said that was one of them, but
that's a great question. I think personally for me, if I reflect on that question, it has to be moving from my position at Taylor ISD, where I was an instructional coach, a department head, and a classroom teacher, and I took a position with the service center at Region 10 in Dallas as a math consultant. At Taylor, I was responsible for roughly 100 students in my class. As an instructional coach, about 900 students on my campus. And my department, I had about 7 teachers within my department. As I transitioned from that position to Region 10, as a service center, Region 10 serves, I think, upwards of 800,000 students, 50,000 plus teachers, upwards of 130 districts plus private and charter. So personally for me, going from that one single campus and taking that information and applying it to such a large scale, personally for me, was possibly the riskiest thing and also the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
very good. Wow, that's great. Wow.
Oh, Kevin,
So,
actually,
oh,
before we move on, since you asked me that question, I think it's a fair game if I ask you that question back, right? So how about this?
yes.
What's the biggest risk you've ever taken professionally?
Okay, that was pretty risky just asking the host the question. But anyways, good, actually a good question, and I think a good one for everybody to think about, and hopefully the people watching are also thinking themselves. Probably a bit like you, it would be for me. I was a department chair in a school that was in a pretty rural part of Ontario, Canada. We had 1,000 students total. So you talk about how much you have to see. So 1,000, that's it. I mean, it's a pretty small area. And I had an opportunity to work with Texas Instruments and the T³ organization and take on and working with instructors like yourself from across North America and even around the world. And that was like, wow, that was a big sort of change in thought to think about that, but it was also an exciting thing. It was a risk thinking, oh, am I up to this? Am I going to, fall flat in my face in this? I remember it's the first time I addressed the instructors at one of the conferences. There's 300 people in the room, and I'm thinking, well, either this is going to be the worst 15 minutes of my life, or it's going to be, hopefully it's going to go okay. And you're right. But the thing is, I think you're right. The risk, and I'd encourage, as you would too, it's this fear of failure that almost can drive us
Yeah.
to sort of overcome and maybe excel a bit and sort of feel good about things. And especially when you learn, as you mentioned, was one of the areas it just, you come away with a high, a very natural high, at least I found
You do
anyways.
that professional growth. I think that's so impactful.
Yeah. Well, now thinking of the students, and so I know we both had a chance, but I'm particularly interested in you since you've done a lot of thinking about this. With that comes to the students, what do you think is the most risky thing for them to do, and then how do you help them get over that
I,
obstacle?
I think, Kevin, fundamentally, I think it's no different for your students uh, as it is for us. The conversation we've been having about failure, I think same thing with your students. In class, they don't want to seem in front of their peers like they don't know what they're talking about. That prospect of failure for your students also stops them at times to take those risks. So it's very similar what I talked about in the video, where when you asked me, one of the reasons I wanted to say no was in front of my peers, I did not want to fail. And I think it's also true for your students. So the question is, how do we help them overcome this obstacle? That's what you asked. I think the first thing we need to do is to create an environment that's safe for them to learn and to take that risk. It has to be a safe. And that's something that starts with the instructor, the teacher. We have to create that space where students are allowed to make mistakes and to learn from it. So let me give you an example of certain things that I do in my classroom. So I'm teaching Math 3303, which is specifically for students within the You Teach Dallas program. And their goal is to ultimately become high school STEM educators. So that's their ultimate goal. So in my class, I have certain assignments, especially the big ones. So right now they're working on a final project assignment where they have to submit data they've collected, a model that they've created for the data they've collected, and a justification. This assignment can be turned multiple times until they get a perfect grade. I did the same thing for the initial proposal that they submitted. We kept working on it until it was a perfect grade. When I have major assignments, if I do that, that sends the signal to my students that, you know what, the first time I submit something, I can try to deviate from my natural thought process because it's okay. If I mess up here, it's completely fine because guess what? As long as I submit the assignment on time and do the best I can, I will get multiple opportunities with the support of the teacher to get the best grade as possible. So again, I'm creating that space for my students where they feel comfortable taking that risk. So if we can do that for our students, I think they're more willing to take risk in your classroom. So that's something that we have to, as educators, foster that environment in the classroom.
Okay, great. We do have a question that's come in from Damien, and I think this is a great question as well. It kind of relates to what we've already been talking a little bit, but I'd love to know your thoughts.
Sure.
What techniques have you used to help to get yourself over that, and in quotes, am I good enough hump? That's always been, Damien writes, it's always been one of his biggest challenges, even when asked to do something outside your comfort zone. And I think that's true probably for not just you, Damien, but a lot of people. Am I good enough? So how do you get over that hump?
So Damien, for me, it's just that if you've heard of the term imposter syndrome. So for me, it's really when I get put into unique situations where that imposter syndrome really kicks in. So what I do, Damien, is whenever I feel like I'm not good enough to do something, I want to really have some evidence. Is it really factual? So what I do is I actually sit down and I write all the things I bring to the table. And then I write down all the reasons why I shouldn't do this. And often the reasons why I don't want to do this is because I'm scared. There's nothing concrete that should stop me. So for example, let's say when Kevin asked me for the 7 for 7, I think I told him, can I get a little time to think about it? And when I sat down, I did exactly what I'm talking about. I wrote down everything. What's stopping me? Is it the fact public speaking? I don't have experience. I have that. Right? I went through step by step every single thing that was stopping me. And I said, I have everything that is needed to do this successfully. And because of that, I was able to say yes. Now, there are times when I have said no. I think Charlene one time asked me to do something with coding, and it was a new tool. And I told Charlene, give me 6 months, because I sat down and I did that. I said, I don't think I can do this successfully because I have everything else except for this tool is brand new. I need a little bit more time. So Damien, if you can sit down and figure out, it's a self-reflection process. I think all those self-doubt has to do with internal battle. I think every one of us is doing that. Our kids have internal battles. We have internal battles that are stopping us from taking these risks. So if you sit down and write everything out, I think that might help you truly identify, is it factual reasoning that's stopping you, or is it just you're afraid to take that risk?
Wow. I think just if I might add, one of the things I found is that afterwards reflecting is that often when you're asked to do something, it's because other people have seen that in you. They see that ability and that opportunity. And I think you need to take that and think, well, if they're seeing it in me, then I need to also see it in myself. And the other thing, sometimes it's also, I'm going to bit just a little off tangent, but the thing is sometimes there's a value in sometimes volunteering to do it. I think sometimes to taking that risk, and because you think of you, as you say, the students in the classroom, we want that student to raise his hand, and yet that can be the scariest thing to do, to do that. But try it, go for it, volunteer. And I look back, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure others online have said the same thing. When you said, I think I'd like to try this. Give it a try. I mean, it's going to be a learning process, like you did with the coding. It takes time, but if you put in the effort, it'll be very rewarding. So,
and don't be scared of that failure. I think that's one other thing, Damien, that stops us, right? That prospect of failing. I think if you see it as an experience where you can learn and grow, I think you are going to be more willing to take that risk. So take it as a step towards whatever you're going to and saying, you know what, if it doesn't go as planned, I will learn from it and then I'll do better the next time. So if you go in that way, I think you're more likely to take some of those risks.
That's good. So another question that we have is that it's come in there, and this is from Bob, and it says, if a teacher is risk adverse, what strategies or advice do you have for them?
I think piggybacking on that little conversation that we had right now, I think it can just kind of transition right to it, right? The first thing I would do is ask the teacher, what's stopping them from taking that risk? Because if they've not really evaluated that question, then I really can't help them. So for example, if a teacher doesn't want to take a risk, is it because they're afraid of public speaking? Are they afraid that their content knowledge or level is not as strong as they would like it to be? Do they lack the experience in certain areas? Is it self-doubt? And all of them stem from knowing yourself. So the first thing I would ask that teacher, what's stopping you from taking that risk? Because if they can't answer that, it's really hard for me to help them. Now, once they've identified that, so for example, if they say public speaking, so what can we do to support them? Well, let's just start off slowly, right? If you wanted to present, instead of doing a national conference, like I said in the video, maybe you present to your peers in front of 2 or 3 individuals, and then maybe towards 10 individuals, do local conference, then you move up and slowly get to a point where you feel comfortable if your issue is public speaking. Now, for me, when I did that little CS computer science, I knew I had the pedagogy. I didn't have the content. So what I needed to do was I started purchasing books on Python because that's the language we're going to use. And I got myself comfortable with the language. It was the content that was stopping me. It was not the pedagogy. It was not public speaking. It was not the experience. It was the lack of content. So the first thing I would ask you, Bob, to ask that teacher is what's stopping them? And once we have that identified, I think it's similar to what we do with our students. It can't be this little, approach where we're just going to kind of shoot something and figure out what's going to happen. I think we need to ask our students and our teachers what's stopping them from really taking that risk, even if it's in the classroom, maybe doing surveys with your students, anonymous surveys, asking what's stopping you from raising your hand. Well, if they say, I don't feel safe in your classroom, then you have your answer, right? So I think knowing something about your students and about your teachers might help you guide them in the right direction, Bob.
Okay. Now, it was we mentioned earlier, and you do teach pre-service teachers, and I think there's a question as well from Sherry just asking, what advice would you give to young teachers or to pre-service teachers, and specifically, I know that you work with, in getting them to want to share with others? What's advice for them?
So the question is, how do I kind of foster, or how do I help my pre-service teachers share their knowledge or their expertise with others?
Yeah, that's right.
I think we've got to give them lots of opportunities. So let me just tell you, in our program, we're big on sharing with others. So in step 1, which is our first intro course, where they go into an elementary setting. So in our program, students are in the classroom from the first semester. Now, obviously, this semester is quite unique. So none of our students are in the classroom, but in a normal setting, step 1, which is our first introductory 1-hour course, our students are actually in the elementary classroom teaching science or math lessons. At the end of that semester, they have to spend 5 minutes presenting to their peers what they've learned, how they allowed students to explore science or math concepts. So they're sharing in step 1 with their peers. In step 2, which is their middle school experience, which is also a 1-hour course, they do the same thing. At the very end, they are presenting to their peers what they learned through that process, from the feedback they receive from us, their mentors, their peers as they teach these lessons from the get-go. So one thing that we do really well from the start of the program, this whole idea of we have to really think about this whole process as a community. It can't be that I'm going to learn on my own and I've got this closed door. We're going to be sharing from day 1 of what we're learning. And it's okay to ask. We keep telling our students, if you don't know something, it's okay to ask. just like I did. I remember Kathy West, this was in Taylor. I was teaching a unit on, it was a pre-cal lesson, and I didn't feel 100% confident in it. I went to Kathy West during her conference period. I told her my concerns. We sat down, came up with a game plan. It should be okay to tell someone, especially your peers, that, you know what, I need some help making sure that my students are successful, rather than attempting to do something that's going to cause more harm down the road. So I think just having that open network and fostering that attitude from day one, that it's important for us to share our growth, our failure, and how we're going to improve from that process.
Wow, yeah. I think that those are great strategies, because I think that's one of the challenges I found with it is teaching. I think a lot of teachers, I don't think I'm alone this way, but you're right. We go into our classroom and we shut our door, and we're there. We're isolate on our own, and you're right. It is some, again, of that value of going to conferences, going to events, and you're right. We may not start to think, well, I'm not ready to teach or to present, let's say, an NCTM national or even a statewide conference. But you're right. I think just even sharing, and I remember a department chair that when I first started, was great with this. He basically encouraged everyone around the table to share some things. Share things, what you're doing, share anything that you're having help. And I remember him leading sort of our department meetings, which often could be very boring and so on, can be very minutiae and so on. But he'd always start with some math thing, like, let's do something mathy in that. And I still remember him even bringing in fruit one time and say, what math questions can we come up with? But that whole idea of sharing, I think, is, you're right, is that that helps to break down the barriers of risk, because you hear other people. Sorry,
And
go ahead.
Kevin,
Yeah.
can I add one more thing? If you are still afraid to take that risk, think about your students. If you are doing things in your classroom that are successful, but you're not sharing with others, that is not equitable for the students on your campus. That's not equitable for students on your district. And it's also not equitable because if you're doing something fantastic in your local district, share that with others, help others that might benefit and ultimately benefit their students in the classroom.
Yeah. Well, I think for a lot of us recognize that over the years we've all learned from other teachers, and we've learned, if we hadn't had other teachers who are willing to share, we ourselves. And then I think there's also this syndrome, and maybe just we're getting close under time, but I think one of the things is also this fear of, well, what I have to share, is it, oh, it's not really new,
Yeah.
right? You're laughing, you're smiling. I think
Yeah.
you've heard this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the idea that, this wouldn't be helpful to anybody, but you know what? It just very well be. But go ahead, you're going to say.
And even if you're thinking that way, I'm telling you, it's very therapeutical, right? It's going to improve you. It's going to grow you professionally. So if your mindset is it's not going to help someone, I guarantee just going through that process is going to help you.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like what you're saying with our students. We always say to the students, ask the question, because what the question you have the courage to ask, there's probably a handful of at least other students that want to ask the same thing. And I think that's very true with that. We need to have that encourage. This has been, I think I'm really excited. I almost want to go out and do something thinking of taking a risk or something doing something new for myself. So with that. So I think that would be great. So I think in the end, I want to hopefully encourage everyone, as Amin does, to think about what you can do to contribute, to share. One of the things coming up, just to note, is our T³ International Conference is going to be virtual, unfortunately, this year because of the issues with the pandemic, but it will be in February. There will be details posted on the education.ti.com site, and encourage you to think about registering and learning and working with others. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Amin, for sharing this evening and sharing more of your wisdom and understanding.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for asking me to be one of the 7 for 7 presenters. That was a great experience and definitely allowed me to grow professionally as well. So I appreciate that opportunity.
Oh, I'm glad you said yes. That's great. And I think that's the lesson hopefully we all learn. So thank you. Look forward to seeing you next week. We have Monique Williams, and I'm looking forward to it. It's Cultivating Southern Hospitality. So it should be another great session. So thank you, and good night, everyone.